If there is one thing that is certain to make or break any business, any economy, or any financial forecast for that matter, it is certainty or lack of certainty. And along with certainty, we must also have clarity. And that is where I need to address Rachel Reeves' interaction with interviews today and what she has said at the Labour Party conference, which speaks of harder choices ahead, as though there haven't been enough hard choices behind to hinder and hamper businesses and the general public, despite what they claim to think has been a fantastic year for Labour. So we're obviously here on My Money channel. Please do subscribe here for clarity, I would hope, on all things money, business, finance, developing new ideas, and hopefully creating a wealthier lifestyle for you. At least I can tell you the things that I've done that have worked, that have not worked. Many things that I've done have completely failed, and I think it's because of the things that I've done that have failed that I would like to think that what I do now works. And so I will share those things with you. But so first of all, let's go to this, because this is just the briefest of updates from this Labour Party conference, where they are obviously gleefully discussing what they've done and how they think it's fantastic, and obviously criticizing reform. And it seems to be an ongoing thing for them these days to criticize reform and everything they do and stand for. Now, Rachel Reeves, speaking at this, has warned of harder choices ahead, as though there haven't been enough difficult things behind to attack businesses. But let's take a look more specifically at what she's saying in interview, because one of the big things is whether or not she's going to increase VAT, because this, in their manifesto, was quite clear that they will not increase VAT. And yet, despite saying so in the manifesto, they then hit private schools with VAT. Now, they said that's not an increase in VAT. It's just we've removed an exemption, which even the Supreme Court said it's not going to get tied up in the wording that they try and spin this to the general public, because even the Supreme Court didn't really hold it as a correct term. They said we would think that that is just a label. So talking about VAT, obviously, if VAT is increased, it increases costs for everybody, not just working people that they always talk about, but everybody. Everybody will be affected by VAT. Every business will be affected by VAT. Now, one of the things, there's a couple of things they might do, but I'm going to come back to those in a minute. First, I'm going to play this interview for you, how frustratingly she refuses to answer the question. And I fear that there's an alternative answer to a yes-no to this question. Let me play it for you, and then we'll discuss it. I've got some thoughts on it. Have a listen to this.
Are you going to, can you rule out increasing VAT? It's a yes or no?
What I'm saying to you
no,
is
I've asked the question, can you rule out increasing VAT?
A reason.
I know, but can you rule it out?
The manifesto stands, and it stands for a reason. Look, I'm not going to, on this programme, 2 months ahead of the budget, to go through it line by line.
No, I've only asked you about one thing and one line.
Yes, but we made that commitment in the manifesto. We made it for a reason, and those commitments stand. Those commitments remain our commitments for this budget and for this Parliament. The manifesto stands, Susanna.
Okay, so...
And just to be clear, the manifesto that she's harping on about here was that they would not increase VAT. And this was the whole argument with the private school fees, because they added it to private school fees and then said, well, it wasn't technically an increase. But again, just listen on to this, let's persevere, and then I'll give you my thoughts.
So, sorry, I just want to translate this. You will not increase VAT in the budget.
The manifesto that we stood on made...
And she goes back to the manifesto and she refuses to say yes or no. It is a yes-no question. So here's what I think, and this is why I think it's not necessarily a straightforward yes-no question. Whilst she's being pressed on whether or not she will increase it from 20%, which obviously would affect everybody, the answer may not be so straightforward. And in fact, if she says, no, we will not increase VAT, then if there is any VAT applied in future where it is not applied now, people will absolutely point back to this interview and say, you said quite clearly you would not increase VAT. Now, just because she doesn't increase it from 20% upwards, that doesn't mean it won't apply where it doesn't currently apply. And the simple reason is this. There are multiple ways, but two primary ways that she may apply VAT where it is not currently applied. And the first of them is this. There are certain exemptions or partial exemptions from the levy of VAT. And some of these are quite controversial. One of them has been to the Supreme Court as to whether it was legally unfair. That's VAT on private school fees. The Supreme Court ultimately said it does infringe on the right to education, but it's government policy, so they can pretty much do what they like. Now, the reason that was so controversial is if we look at the exempt goods and services, you can see quite clearly here, one of them says education and training. Now, university is still not levied with VAT, and various other training does not have the levy of VAT. They specifically, and in my view, harshly and spitefully targeted private schools to levy VAT on private school education. That is one reason it's so controversial. That is one reason I think it's abhorrent. But take a look at the list here, because if she removes any of these exemptions, you'll be next if you use any of these services. Because whilst some people were quite critical and saying, well, if you send your children to private schools, pay your tax and this sort of thing, they might not be so quick to say the same thing if they suddenly believe that this is now going to apply to them. Because the exemptions currently apply to insurance, finance arrangements, credit arrangements. The reason being, if you're already paying for something like that where you're borrowing money or whatever, and it's just money for money, then it's not really a value-added service. You're just borrowing money or financing something. So they say that you shouldn't have VAT applied. Now, caveat here, I'm not a VAT specialist. There is a VAT specialist, Barrister, who has taken a look at some of my videos from time to time, and I would defer to his expertise as to the true reasoning for all of this. But one way or another, it doesn't apply to insurance, finance, and credit. It didn't apply to, or doesn't for many of the cases apply to education and training, but they did spitefully attack private schools. And yes, I will keep going on about that. But fundraising events by charities, subscriptions to membership organizations, selling, leasing and letting of commercial land and buildings. And then, of course, there are VAT conditions, which may be changed as well. So the current conditions depend on who's providing or buying them, where they're provided, how they're presented for sale, the precise nature of the goods and services, etc. And then you can see other things such as, let's say, sport, leisure, culture, and antiques. Now, if we look at those, they include things such as betting and gambling, including pool betting and games of chance, bingo, lottery tickets, all of these sort of things. They currently are exempt under these VAT notices. So all of these things may be subject to change. So if you partake in any of these things, and we can come back to the list here. There are various rules around clothing, for example, clothing and footwear. So for baby wear and children's clothes, it's 0%. That changes, I think, if there are certain type like real fur and things like that. But then there are other rates such as 5% for all these other children things. Cycle helmets, 0%. So whilst technically they're not an exemption, but there are 0 rated for VAT. Again, deferring here because I'm not the expert on VAT, but the bottom line is you either pay 0%, 5%, or the full 20% rate. But each of these things where they don't currently apply is one way they may apply. There's another hugely controversial one, and all of these tie into personal finance and planning, which I'm going to come back to in just a moment. Now, you'll have probably realized from the news just recently that there's an alarming increase in the number of people that are looking to find or even steal private information or online activity about another person with malicious or nefarious intent. They want to use this against them. There's also an increase in the number of scam and hack attempts across the board on a number of different devices, with software being updated virtually every week. That is why I can wholeheartedly recommend to you NordVPN, which can help not only to keep you anonymous, but also to protect your devices from hack and scam attempts when you use them online. And NordVPN will protect all your devices by scanning for malicious websites, malicious downloads, all whilst providing you an ultra-fast connection with a dedicated anonymous IP address, and also scan the internet for any data breaches that you might need to be aware of. And as they're a partner to my channels here, if you join with my link, you get 4 months extra free on top of any deal and a 30-day money-back guarantee using the code Daniel Schensmith on screen and in the link below. You can download it quickly, install it quickly, and you'll be protected virtually immediately. And so once you install it, you'll get that peace of mind knowing you're that little bit more protected in today's modern, dangerous online world. So coming back to the second and fairly controversial reason that VAT might change, because obviously with VAT applying to not everything, but almost everything that you buy, goods and services wise, the threshold at which businesses must register for VAT is a controversial one. Obviously, if the threshold is higher, then businesses can turn over more money without needing to charge you VAT, meaning that they are not adding the VAT to their goods and services before they sell them to you. So it's £100 rather than £120, based on 20%, of course. But that threshold might mean that smaller businesses can prosper if the threshold is higher because their goods and services are cheaper to you. But if the threshold is lowered, then suddenly they have to levy VAT on all their goods and services, if they are applicable, of course, and then they become more expensive to you. So this is a controversial one here. So the current threshold is £90,000 calendar year taxable turnover. And turnover is the money generated by the business from the sale of its goods or services. This is not profit, it is turnover. So it doesn't matter how much profit you make. It is a turnover threshold to register for VAT, after which you must levy VAT on all of your goods and services if it applies. Now, obviously, there are certain exemptions, different rates, and lower rates, zero rated, and so on. Again, defer to an expert if you want expert VAT advice, but it either applies or it doesn't apply, and it's important to get it right. So that's why we have specialists for that. But the point of it is this: the lower that threshold is, the earlier that a business will have to register for VAT and levy the applicable VAT on its goods and services, and thus make it more expensive to buy goods and services from that company. And so this increasing or decreasing the threshold is a fairly controversial topic, because increasing the threshold would arguably stimulate growth for smaller businesses, smaller to medium businesses. Lowering it, on the other hand, would generate more revenue for the tax office, but make it more difficult for those small businesses to grow. And that is when we have articles such as this one here, which highlight just how controversial this is, and the uncertainty, which is what I outlined at the beginning of the video. So here we've got what it means for small businesses. The real problem now is uncertainty. And I gave my intro for this video before finding this article, so it just shows that we're in agreement and on the same page. With such wildly different briefings in the press, small businesses don't know whether to expect relief or extra burdens. They don't know whether it's likely that there's going to be an increase in their prices or a decrease in their prices. As this article says, if the threshold rises to 100,000, which some have reported that it might, some firms currently holding back may push ahead with expansion. It would be a modest but welcome signal that the government wants to back growth. However, there have also been reports to suggest that it might fall to 30,000, just £30,000. Meaning so many small businesses like salons, like small shops, small service businesses would then be required to register for VAT and levy VAT on their goods and services, meaning thousands of small traders would be dragged into VAT, facing new paperwork, cash flow headaches and forecasts, and for many, this will be a tax raid rather than a growth strategy, because whilst they will not be directly paying the VAT themselves, they will have to they'll be given a choice. They will have to levy the VAT on their existing prices or swallow that amount that they have to report as VAT collected by the business, because they are required to collect it. You become an unpaid tax collector for the VAT office. And so until Rachel Reeves stands up and confirms yes or no, which is why I was talking about it as a yes-no question, until she confirms that, we don't have any idea. So How do you then translate that into personal finance, personal development, and planning and forecasting and budgeting yourselves? Well, for things like this, you can't until you know exactly what the outcome is, which is why it's so frustrating. All you can do is forecast and put things down on paper, because so many people fail to plan. And as the somewhat corny saying goes, if you fail to plan, you might as well plan to fail. Because if you don't plan and you don't know what's coming ahead and you haven't got those figures set out in advance, then you won't know whether that's going to be successful or not. And I can give you a bit of a story about this, because many years ago, I did various different consulting contracts and various things. One of them was to consult on marketing, online marketing, digital presence and such, using Google AdWords and various other campaigns. So this was, without going into too much detail, this was a club that had a membership and they sold products, and they wanted to produce a magazine and market it to their members. And it was going to cost them something in the region, I think it was about £9,000. And they said to me that they had a range of products they wanted to sell, a range of memberships they wanted to sell. And so we sat down together and we had a frank conversation on what would be a good response from this campaign, what would be a poor response for the campaign, and something in the middle that would be more likely what you might expect. We took a range of the membership sales and a range of the product sales from their catalog and the profit margins. We worked it all out, and at a certain percentage of response to that campaign, we worked out that it was going to cost them at the very least £5,000. And that was net of all profits and everything else. So it was going to cost them at least £5,000 to do this campaign, even if it did reasonably well. And then I said, well, is this a long-term strategy for those members, or is this just a case of you want to generate some profit from this campaign so that you can repeat it and do it now? And they said, well, obviously, we want to be able to repeat it. We want it to be successful. We want it to generate a profit, and we want to be able to do it again and again. Now, obviously, they can't do it again and again and lose £5,000 each time. If it was a long-term strategy to gain members over the long term, and then if they were to plan out the life membership of each of those members, and would they be a net profit to the business over 10 to 15 years? But they said that wasn't really the strategy. They didn't see people stick around for that long. And therefore, they wanted it to be a short-term profit from that campaign. And so obviously, if the campaign was going to cost them money, it was not worth doing. So they saved at least £5,000, if not £9,000, if the campaign was a total flop. So the moral of the story here is, if you're going to do anything like that, you need to cost it out. So I've looked at selling certain products and things with my channels here, and I've thought, well, if I were to buy in a product that cost me so many pounds and then ship it out, the shipping costs so many pounds, and there's a cost to the cost of doing business, the transaction fees, and all of this sort of stuff. Somebody that actually packs the things and ships them out. If ultimately you end up with a £1 or £2 per item, and the risk of one item being returned and not being saleable again, and how many products you'd have to sell afterwards, if you put all of this down into a spreadsheet and realize that it is just not viable unless you're doing it at absolute scale, so that you get the benefits of the economies of scale, then you can decide ahead of time not to do it, or find a different product, or find a more profitable product, or a different way of providing similar products or services. And so only by putting those down in a spreadsheet can you really plan. And as I've mentioned many times before, if you register for free on blackbeltbarrister.com, there is a members free section, various downloads, bits of law, and a spreadsheet, a budgeting spreadsheet. And I'll link a video below where I went through that spreadsheet, how you can personally budget for your own personal finances and get your personal finances in order. Again, this is not me telling you what to do. This is just me telling you this is what we did, we have done, we do regularly, and it works. So I can recommend that you follow it. It's not financial advice. I can recommend that you follow this strategy of putting everything in this spreadsheet, keeping track of everything, and making it work for you. So hopefully, with the certainty aspect here, you can have certainty in certain things. You put them down in a spreadsheet, you know exactly what's going to happen going forward, and you'll know whether it's going to work even before you start. I hope that was useful. If it was, please do leave me some comments below and like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd be very grateful for that. And of course, thank you for watching.